Terrible, terrible enemies. Terrible enemies is what we are. Terrible, terrible enemies. Terrible enemies is what we are. If we are alone at home, in the attic or in the basement, then it sounds 1,000 times. Terrible enemies is what we are. Terrible, terrible enemies. Terrible enemies is what we are. Terrible, terrible enemies. Terrible enemies is what we are. In the evening the moon comes to put us to sleep while the rats remain silent. We are not going to a city, not to a pub, metro or street. Terrible, terrible enemies. Terrible enemies is what we are. No one is going to spoil our food, 'cause we didn't bring anything. There is nothing we can know. Those at home will eat for one. Terrible, terrible enemies. Terrible enemies is what we are. Terrible, terrible enemies. Terrible enemies is what we are. And the morning will come loudly, crying and fighting in front of TV, until we have all nightmares all night. Terrible enemies is what we are. Terrible, terrible enemies. Terrible enemies is what we are. Terrible, terrible enemies. Terrible enemies is what we are.